anguish over what to do about my schedule and the fact that it's Mother's Day. But I talked to Pastor John, and he pointed out that, well, these sessions are being taped, and the fact is that it serves as a library, and that he was remarking to me the great number of hits that we've had on that topic. The people have been watching it. So you folks really, it doesn't matter if there are 10 or if, because there'll be like 100 who eventually come and watch the series. And also, this summer, we had to switch the seminar in June, next month. We had to switch it from the third week to the fourth week. So we just want to alert you that you may have a schedule, you probably have a schedule that's not up to date anymore. And also, I removed from the schedule any meeting during July and August because of my conflicts I have with swimming. And like last week, I was in Mississippi. Next weekend, I'm in Connecticut. The next weekend after that, I'm in St. Louis. And, you know, and this is high season. It starts right now, and it starts in May, June, July, and then it just kind of, drops off to nothing. And so that's why I do have the problem. And yet I'm able to I'm still able to pursue the activity, and I think it helps keep me young. And I don't know how long I'll be able to do it, but I kind of decided that I'm just going to keep going until such a time as I'm physically unable to do it. And I don't know when that time is coming. The conclusion of my heart study is now I have AFib, and that's not good. And if I'm in an AFib episode, I'm not supposed to compete, which is understandable. So I don't know how often that'll happen. I had one yesterday, but I haven't had one in months. So you kind of go with the flow as you get older, don't you? And do what you can. But who's complaining? We can look around and see people that are far worse shape than we are in, and who are unable to come to church. So this topic is rather specialized. This is something that I would teach to hospice volunteers, because we always had a large hospice volunteer segment. And these are important things for people to know who go and visit the dying. And the benefit for you is that if it ever should happen that a friend of yours is dying, you'll feel a lot more comfortable in going over there, especially the first couple times, because you'll have all this material to read, and it'll help you through the visits. Such visits are difficult because, number one, they're emotionally trying, and number two, it brings up all of our feelings of inadequacy, that we don't know what we're going to say, and it takes courage to go. But with the material that I'm presenting to you in this whole seminar, that will give you tools that you can use if you ever come to face such a situation. So now we're starting with item number 83. This session is actually ending the processional toward immortality, because I view dying as a processional. It comes from here and goes to there. It's like a march, and you march not alone, but you march accompanied by your friends and loved ones. And that's the beauty, of course, of the connectedness that we have from going to church. You could be a wonderful Christian person and not go to church, and it happens a lot, especially when people move and they don't have the connections again. And you can't ever find a church like the one you left. and the one that you loved, because it's hard to do. Every church is different. And we kind of got that idea from what Pastor John said about his time in Chicago, where there were a dozen ministers who were new to the congregational way, and they all had a different story to tell. And this is true with churches too. It's wonderful when you can find a kind, loving church and you feel at home when you go. So number 83, how do we respond when the dying one says that he is ready to go? Well, I suggest you pray with them as they request. You can ask them, well, would you like me to say a prayer for you? And you need to kind of find out what they want you to pray for, if you can. Some will say, pray that I can go quickly. That's very common. People who are actively dying are suffering, and they look upon death as homegoing. They're going home because they're Christians. Some want a prayer for healing, or a prayer for peace. For healing, we ask God if he will heal, but we don't always know that he will heal. And we have to ask God for this healing, believing that it's possible, but knowing that it just doesn't always happen. We don't know why it doesn't always happen, but it's not a certain thing. And I'm like Ed shared with us today here, he feels like it was a miracle that he healed so rapidly. He's not a spring chicken anymore, and yet he knit together really well. And what happened to him was not planned, it's just what happens in life. So I would assure the patient that I'll stand with them. I always read a scripture with each visit, and usually it's a psalm. And if you get familiar with the psalms by your own reading through them, you'll have a couple of psalms in your mind that you could read. There are just so many comforting psalms, because the psalms were different authors. We believe that David did a lot of it, but whoever wrote these was a suffering person. And these psalms are a heart cry out to God, and it's very, very helpful. Also, I discovered that there was nothing like, when I, as a young pastor, starting to visit people who were ill or dying, that there was nothing like a hymn. And so I brought a tape recorder, as good as it was in that day with that technology, and I would be pushing these buttons trying to find the hymn to play. And it was just awkward. So finally I decided, I just brought a hymn book, and I said, well, I'll sing the song. And you know what I discovered was the sicker they were, the better I sounded. They just, that was fine. They didn't, it didn't matter. I ended up singing for the director of the Inland Chorale, who died. She was the founder and director of the Inland Chorale, this incredible musician. And I sang to her, and she told me how much it blessed her, because at that point, it's not about the technical singing ability of the person singing. It's about the words and the melody and how it comes together. I mean, like, there's nothing like Amazing Grace. That song is just, it's amazing to a person who is very ill. And we can all say a prayer. And in the prayer, I always ask for comfort for the person, and that that God would be with them and accompany them. I ask for healing if I know that the person wants that. I need to check that. And of course, hand-holding. Mary Jane Lynn was a Catholic nun, and it's an interesting story. She had two brothers. They became priests. So this family had 3 children, and they all entered into holy orders in the Catholic Church. So that brings me to the joke of where do popes come from? And the answer is good Catholic families. Well, she came from a good Catholic family, and believe it or not, all three of them specialized in helping the dying. And they lived in different places too, but they all got into it, and then they all started writing books about it. And they wrote, in fact, this book together. And here's a quote. "Now I realize the pain is gone. She no longer wants to talk. It is simply enough to attend to her bodily needs, to hold her hand, to pray silently in my heart that the peace continues to the end and beyond it." Number 84, how do we pray for the dying? Well, for a sense of God's presence, for peace beyond measure, for a feeling of forgiveness in all relationships. And boy, that's a big one. It's hard for a lot of people to die because of broken relationships. That any spiritual darkness around them might be replaced with light, for a gracious end to suffering, for immediate relief from pain, for physical comfort, and for struggling loved ones who are surrounding them. Number 85, at this stage, the personal comfort of the dying one should take highest priority. And this I can't emphasize enough, because over and over again in hospice, I came upon an elderly couple where the caregiver, either the husband or the wife, was withholding pain medication because he or she did not want him or her to become addicted. I mean, that's... So here's an example. George cried out in pain. He asked for one of his pain pills, even though he was not due to have one for another hour. His wife would not give him one, fearing that he might become addicted to them. By so doing, she helped maintain her denial stage, and George died the next day. Now, isn't that something? That by withholding the pain, she could deny that he really was that bad. And yet he died very quickly. And I also believe that we need to be alert to the eating, the fact that they don't eat. It doesn't do any good to berate them for not eating. They're not going to eat. They can't eat. And so the last 4 or 5 days, normally, the person will not eat. I also believe they should be placed in the least restrictive environment in which they're comfortable. It might be another hospital, a rest home, a care home, or it might be home. Now, the problems with being home historically are that you don't have the ability to take care of them at home, especially medical needs. How do you know, the doctors don't go home. So hospice came along. Came from England, started here in America in the 50s, and worked its way up to where now it's the chief medical care for hospice patients, because it allows you to have your loved one at home. You can do it because of hospice support. They will provide the doctor visits, the nurse visits, caregiver visits, and it can be done as long as you're comfortable having them at home and the patient wants to be home. And I'll tell you, most patients do want to be home. So that brings us into number 86. I got a quote from Joe Bailey's book, The View from a Hearse, which came out in the 60s, and it was a bestseller. It was really good. He says, "The ordinary age-old fear of death has an added dimension today, the anticipation of being alone in life's closing hour, isolated from those with whom the other hours and years and decades of life have been shared. We have consented to death's banishment from our homes to the hospital, where it is acted out in a setting of sterile equipment and efficient, unfamiliar people." And then COVID came along, and it was a nightmare because people were dying alone. And that's probably one of the most brutal aspects about it. But also, we know that there are some medical conditions that just won't allow the person to be at home. Or they're using complicated equipment that costs $1 million. And so we just have to be alert to that. And I give the complications of it. And another kind of an example or two that I'll let you read. So it's a question that has to be settled, and for most people, it ends up the patient can be home, and they love being home, and they do pass on from their home. So number 87 is again from Mary Jane Lynn. 4 things that had to happen before her dying brother was released to die. He died really young. Number 1, one must reach certain points of fulfillment, like a daughter getting married, an approaching holiday, or a family reunion. And the person will wait to die until that happens. Number 2, one must forgive to be forgiven. First, there's divine forgiveness, and then the forgiveness in present human relationships, forgiveness in past human relationships, which is a kind of inner healing, and also kind of forgiveness for the future, in the sense you have to apologize to yourself for dying. It's a very convoluted psychological problem. Number 3, one must relinquish their paradise, and we talked about this when we were dealing with aging. May mean passing the torch, giving up one's life's work for those who work to the very end. I met a man in St. Louis who owned a manufacturing company making lamps. It was a very well-known brand of lamps, and he gave me a tour of the factory. He was 96 years old, and he came to work every day. Well, when he went to die, it was hard. He had to give up his kingdom because he couldn't go to work every day. It may mean giving up one's role as father, mother, giving up one's special place, family, friends, surroundings. And the 4th is one must say goodbye. Number 88 is related. Sometimes the dying wait until they are released in one of these areas before they finally die. The wedding of a son, the day preceding the wedding, she left the hospital as an elegant lady. Nobody would have believed her real condition, and the next day she died because she was waiting for that. In the area of forgiveness, as Rita slipped into unconsciousness, I realized that at just this moment she had let go of life, that this time it was possible for her to die because our being with her had made it possible for her to forgive it. You know, I've had some remarkable experiences with that. One was a Christian missionary who couldn't die because she felt like she had failed, and another was a hospice patient who I went to visit, and he just kept hanging on, and the nurses said they didn't understand how he could keep hanging on. And we found out in talking to him that he so wanted to see a son, or was it a daughter? I can't remember that. But anyway, I was there, and he waited until that person arrived and walked through the door, and he died. So that happens. That's very common, the fact that the person waits, and he just saw his child, his adult child, and he closed his eyes and died. I'm going to go to number 89. You can read these other things on your own. Let's go to the topic of heroic measures. Should we have heroic measures for people on hospice, for example? People who a doctor has certified are going to die within the next 6 months. Now, you've got to realize when I say heroic measures, we're talking about CPR, and you know, we're lay people. We haven't been there. Most of us haven't been there for a CPR. It's not fun. You end up inadvertently, you have to push so hard on the rib cage, and if you're pushing on old people, you're going to break their ribs, and you're going to hear them snapping as you're pumping. And you're doing that, and they're unconscious. And you're doing that to try to save their life. if they survive, and the chances nationally in America for CPR over all age groups, the chance of success is 10%. 10%. That means we're breaking their ribs, putting them into a world of pain if they should survive, that's going to take months to heal so that they could live another week, months, 2 months, 3 months. And that's what we face. If a person is, say, 25, 45, 50, they could look forward to a number of years. And yes, it would be worth it. But in a case of limited horizon, where you're just looking at months of life, it's, I think, the wrong decision. But it's something that the patient has to be comfortable with doing, and also the family. And of course, you know that normally if the paramedics arrive at home, you call them for CPR, they will first run to the refrigerator to see if there's any CPR orders, because that's where they would be, on a magnet on the refrigerator door. That's where every nurse and every doctor puts them. And then they would follow those things. If not, they will ask you, and they will normally, it's not 100%, it's not the law, they don't have to, they will follow your wishes if you say no. However, if CPR was started by some bystander, then by law they have to continue it all the way into the hospital to be certified by a doctor. So we want to be careful what we do. We had a fire call one night, and medical aid. It was it said child versus it said bicycle versus car. Well, it was a 12-year-old boy on a bicycle got hit by a car. Half of his head was missing, his brain exposed, and some bystander, well-meaning, started CPR. So by law, when our engine was the first unit on the scene, because we always got there before the fire department did, before the ambulance company got there, we had to continue CPR pumping a boy with half a head missing, which was crazy. And I mean, the firefighters, a couple of them, had post-traumatic stress syndrome after it. It was that bad. So CPR is kind of a hot potato. You got to think ahead before you're confronted with these situations. And certainly if you have a very ill family member, you want to talk it over with them to make sure that we've got it straight. And then under number 89, I'll leave you that example from Glenn Davidson, Living with Dying, to read on your own. Number 90, death experiences recorded by those who were revived are found in an interesting book by Raymond A. Moody. It's called Life After Life. And I highly recommend it to you, because it's true stories of people who were clinically dead. They were pronounced dead by a doctor, who weren't dead or came back to life. And they share what they experienced. And so one time, as I've mentioned before, I thought I was dying. I was knocked off a cliff, and I knew the area very well, and I knew that directly below me, 2,000 feet, there was a lake that I had visited, and I was going to end up crashing in the rocks around the lake. And I experienced this very thing. I experienced, in just a second of falling, before I landed on a ledge. I experienced thousands of pictures of my life, and I saw them all. There seems to be a level of consciousness that we can reach only if we think we're dying. And then it opens up. And so there are people who have, that's flashbacks where one's whole life appears before them. But other people have out-of-body experiences where they're hovering above the auto accident scene and they're looking down at the paramedics working on them. And it's unbelievable, these out-of-body experiences. Other people will go and enter into a long tunnel, and then there's light at the end of the tunnel, and there's a figure robed in white. And if he says anything, the most common thing that figure robed in white says is, "Was it worth it?" Now, what does that mean? A lot of conjecture. But most people think that, who have experienced it, think that it meant, was the way I lived my life worth it? Or was living my life the way I did worthwhile? I don't know the answer to that. But you can read all of these things. Let's jump down to number 3, the distinct ability to hear after being declared clinically dead. The person writes in Moody, a person quoted in Moody's book, "I arrested on them. I heard the radiologist who was working on me go over to the telephone, and I heard it very clearly as he dialed it. I heard him say, 'Dr. James, I've killed your patient, Mr. Martin,' and I knew I wasn't dead. I tried to move or to let them know, but I couldn't. When they were trying to resuscitate me, I could hear them telling how many cc's of something to give me, but I didn't feel the needle going in. I felt nothing at all when they touched me." And then in perception, well, I've said the being of light, and also that's an interesting feature that you don't have to be a Christian to see a being. And when most people describe the being as robed in white, that's generally the case. Let's see if I can get this to turn. Okay, you can finish that. And then 91, all that remains is the body, the object of our love. Why is it that the body is so sanctified? I mean, if there's a dead deer along the highway, eventually someone might come, animal control might come and take the corpse away, and it's dumped somewhere in a dump. But if it's a human body, it's a whole different response. As humans, we all realize that somehow the body is more than just an animal body. It's a sanctified body. It is a holy body because we are made in God's image. And it is the object of our love. We have loved that person. And like Jesus' disciples ministered to him after his death, Ray Anderson, my theology professor, wrote, "To wash away the blood from those wounds in his body was to minister to him, to bind his body in fresh linen, to anoint it with fragrant spices, was to hold him present to them during the time when he was most vulnerable, and that transition from life to death until finally the death itself should receive his body." So we minister to the body of our loved one in the same way. We, the loving community, assume responsibility for the body. At a time when the loved one is most vulnerable, we treat it with dignity and we place it in the earth. And Ray goes on to say, at that threshold, we say dust to dust, ashes to ashes, and we give to that body back to the earth tenderly, even as we give over the person confidently and in hope to the resurrection of the body from the dead. We who are a subjective community of human existence give over the person to another community of divine fellowship. When we let go of the hand, we do so with the deepest conviction of our souls that without faltering or fumbling, someone else is taking that hand. Now we come to the topic of viewing the body. Should we at funerals have the body to view, or should the casket be closed? Or in modern day now, so many times we just have cremation and we just have a picture of the person. So those are all possibilities for funerals. But I'd like to talk for a bit about viewing the body and what the implications are. Psychoanalytical evidence indicates that viewing the body is extremely important for grief recovery and the emotional health of the loved ones. It helps to take the first step in finalizing the relationship, and that we used to have a wake at home, and many who counsel agree that it is necessary, though painful, to do this. One author says, "It is my conviction that the presence of the body helps to heal the hurt and further the acceptance of death." And one thing I don't have in the notes is that viewing the body then allows you to begin the first step of recovery. You enter into the recovery phase right after the funeral. Because there's something about seeing the body with your own eyes that gives you the finality that you need to have closure. An example is a hospice patient passed away, a lady about 60, early cancer, lived with her brother because of her 3-year fight against cancer. His wife had died, he was older, and he did not deal well with her passing. He did go to the memorial service. He insisted on no casket present. She wasn't cremated. And he just was like a stone wall there. He could not grieve. And then it was about 5 or 6 months later that suddenly a lady led him into our office, and he was a mess. I mean, he was totally unable to function. He was just crying and a complete emotional wreck. And it was all over the fact that he had not processed this grief. He had not gone through the steps that Kubler-Ross outlined, the 5 steps of denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance. He never got into any of those steps. It was nothing that I could do for him. He needed a psychiatrist. And so we called the mental health emergency line and made arrangements for his friend to take him down there. And that's what happens if you allow grief to just fester in you. So my strong feeling is the most healthy way to start your grief and to get through the grief is having an open casket. There's just something about it. It's age old, but it starts the steps of healing. And so I highly recommended it. Now I know that's really controversial now, and there are many, many people who couldn't accept that. But I also know there are cultures like, say, other than ours, like take the Philippine culture. I had never done a Philippine funeral till one day when we had a Filipino die. Oh my, they wanted an open casket. That was fine. But what I didn't realize was going to happen was a real Donnybrook. As soon as the funeral finished, everyone rushed over to the open casket. And then they started to wail and to weep. And all of the children were picked up and put into the casket with the dead body and pictures taken of them. And the kids, the poor kids were scared to death. And they were wailing and weeping. And I mean, I had a hard time getting them to stop because it went on for like 40 minutes. So that's overdoing it. I mean, that's not our culture. But I just want to point out to you, there are other cultures who deal with this in a different way, and that's the way they deal with it in the Philippines. So I think in America, it's entirely reasonable to have an open casket. And yes, it is difficult. But remember that people who attend always have the option of not going up and viewing the body. They always have that option. But the people who want to can. Anything you want to say about that? Ray Anderson says about this, there is something destructive of our own personhood when we look away too quickly from the presence of the body of another in death. We ought not to try to mitigate our grief by removing the body of the other as an object of our love. Number 93, can Christians use cremation? Well, there's no biblical teaching against it, and I would tell you that the greatest recommendation for it is that the Catholic Church now approves it. So if it's good enough for Rome, it's good enough for me. And I want to be cremated. And the cremation can take place after the funeral, so you can have both. See? You can have your body at the funeral, that's what I've asked for, and cremation afterwards. However, my wife is greatly opposed to cremation, and I'm afraid that she may have the last word. Number 93, can Christians use cremation? Oh, yeah, okay. Yeah, be aware that it can cause forcing a body on view in a family situation where some are adamantly opposed is not good, because it can cause scars. The funeral as a worship service. It can be a thanksgiving for a life given as a gift, and certainly we can all say that all of our friends and family who died were a gift to us. It can be a celebration of a life well lived, as a praise to the glory of God. It can be held in a church, mortuary chapel at home, where I've done a lot of services outdoors, some in Joshua Tree National Park. The expenses, the main cost is the casket. You can spend $20,000 on a nice bronze casket or cardboard for $150. My mother demanded that we have a cardboard casket for her, and we did. And that was because when Dad died in 1954, he died in, 1954. I was 14. When Dad died in 1954, my mother, 37, the bereaved widow who had never finished 6th grade, never driven a car, never written a check, had to make all these funeral arrangements, and my father was a professional worker in wood. He all his life, he imported plywood by the shipload from Japan and brought it over and sold it all across the West Coast. And so she opted for this hand-rubbed walnut casket that cost $14,000. Well, $14,000 in 1954 was a whole lot of money. And it turned out there was money we needed to live on because we had to go on welfare. And my mother had no training. She got a job cleaning houses. But we were on welfare for 2 years. And she was so victimized by that purchase that she was determined that when she died, we weren't going to waste any money by having a fancy casket. So it worked out well. And actually, the cardboard casket looked pretty good. It wasn't as bad as you'd think. They had kind of a finish on it, so it was acceptable. It wasn't a problem. So the other thing is a church can have a pall, P-A-L-L, a pall, which we should have, and I asked John in an email. If we had one, never got a response. I'll have to get on that again. The church needs to have a pall, because with the pall, it's just this fancy covering, cloth covering, that goes over the casket. It doesn't matter what casket you have. You don't see the casket. You just have it over the casket. And some Pauls have a panel that you can take away to open it up. If you can open the casket and put the pall back on and see the body. So that's a wonderful thing. And in many churches, this is old stuff back in the 1900s. I mean, most churches, they had a pall that had been used for 50 years in the church, and it was made by the women. It was fancy sewing or embroidery or whatever. And I recommend to our church that we invest in a pall. We can buy one. We can just buy one on the internet, and we can spend, like for, well, they're expensive. They're like $300, but otherwise maybe the ladies could make one. I know the men couldn't, so I won't ask the men's fellowship to do it. The purpose of a funeral, to minister to the family, is primary. It helps us accept the reality of death. It's an opportunity to express love and respect. It helps friends and families support each other. And it's also a needed reminder that the bell tolls for us. We need to be reminded of that we are on a time schedule. And life isn't about trying to kill a few hours in the afternoon. Life is about the extent of your life and what are you going to do with it? And what are you doing with it? And how can you go out and help make the world a better place? So those are all things that come down from going to a funeral. I love it when I go to a funeral and I walk out in the sunshine and like out in the desert for so many years. I was 28 years out there. Just the wonderful, huge cumulus white clouds and the sun is shining, and it was like an invitation of God to now go out into the world and have your life and do good. Now, the last topic really is the intermediate state of the dead. What is the intermediate state of the dead? And that's a question that can be solved in different ways. The Catholic Church, that has a long history in debating this question, this topic, puts forth the doctrine of purgatory. It's a place where the remainder of the dross is burned off, the dross of the sins of our life. It is the preparatory place for heaven. Whatever sin that we did not deal with here in life is dealt with there. And for example, Mother Teresa didn't go to purgatory because she had dealt with all of that, all of the sins of her life. She went directly to heaven. And anyone who becomes a saint in the Catholic Church, it's the same thing. They didn't go through purgatory. Now, there's hardly any biblical substance. There's one verse that you could twist, but hardly any biblical basis for it. But I will tell you this, the Catholics believe in it. And I've come to the place in my life of wondering, maybe it's true for Catholics. Could that be? It's an intriguing thought. Not true for you and me, because we believe what the Bible says. To be absent in the body is to be with Jesus. But maybe for the Catholics, maybe it's true. I don't know. And I certainly don't believe in running down another man's religion or another woman's religion. Number 2 is soul sleep. This is where the person goes into a sleep. And that's supported by the idea that in Thessalonians, where the graves will be open and the people, when Jesus returns, will rise to meet Christ in the air, and that kind of thing. And here's a quotation from the Seventh-day Answer book. While asleep in the tomb, the child of God knows nothing. Time does not matter. If he should be there 1,000 years, the time would to him be but a moment. One who serves God closes his eyes in death, and whether it's 1 day or 2,000 years, the next instant in his conscience would be when he opens his eyes and beholds the blessed Lord. To him it is death, then sudden glory. Or number 3, number 3 could be immediate fellowship with Christ. Luke 23:43. Today you will be with me in paradise. The great German theologian Thielicke, in his famous book, Living with Death. Paradise can only be described as a relation a personal union and a link. 2 Corinthians 5, 1-10, to be absent from the body is to be present with the Lord. Tilakhi goes on and says, death is viewed here as a going home, no matter what anxiety the long night of death may cause, even before our rising again on the last day, so long as the intermediate state continues. We are taken up into the shelter of that relation that is promised to the faith of the living. We are with Christ. Now, this is amazing to have this famous German theologian write these words. He sounds pretty evangelical, doesn't he? And he was. I really enjoyed going to some of his haunts when I was a student over there. Okay, that deals with some really difficult topics in dying. Not easy to come up with answers, but you've got stuff here to go over and think about on your own. The biggest takeaway is that these topics in your Überlegung, your thinking it over, is going to help prepare you for in time of need. And oh, that's so nice compared to being blindsided. And you know, I still have to make the appointment down at the mortuary. It's funny how we somehow keep putting that off. I'm going to do that this week. I think that the bell's tolling louder. I better get to it. Anything you want to share, you're welcome to.
I'm interested that you feel strongly in the open casket so that people can have that last look. I'd like to know the legal ramifications of that, and does the casket the body needs to be embalmed, or not having been around a person who's died that long, how long does the body last without refrigeration? And then you want to be cremated, and the fact that you don't have the same agreement with you and your wife, and how are you going to resolve that?
Well, if I pass away before she does and she says no cremation, my personal view is I'll be in glory, and that's fine. It doesn't matter. She can do that. There are laws, and now this is going way back to my training in the American Academy of Bereavement. I don't know if this is better, or maybe that one's better. At the time of my training, the law was that the body had to be dealt with within 24 hours of possession by the mortuary. So that means they could either had to embalm it, or they had to burn it, or there was also kind of a little off-ramp there where they could refrigerate the body for, I think, like 72 hours or something, and that was the law. So there wasn't any law about that at a funeral it had to be embalmed, but that's always the case. I don't think you'd find a mortician in California that would have a funeral with the body present that wasn't embalmed. You'd have to have the funeral like right away. Now, you know, they do that in like in Jerusalem. I mean, in Israel, if you die, man, you're it. You're buried in the ground within 24 hours. So funerals are very sudden. But I don't know. I'll find out when I go this week down to that mortuary, right? That one right on next to the old post office, whatever it's called. I forget the name of it. But that Courtners, that's it. Courtners. I'm gonna go down to Courtners. I used to bring my hospice volunteers through Courtners. We'd give them a tour, and did that a lot. So I kind of feel at home there. Any other questions? That was a good question. Yeah, Monty?
kind of a technical thing about ordering hospice. As an individual, can you order a hospice group to come in, or does it have to work through a medical? Do you have to get a doctor's approval? How do you initiate the hospice?
The doctor writes a prescription for hospice. You can't access it, but a doctor can. And he writes the prescription. And this has been a huge problem because hospice has had to deal with it as it's fought its way into its present mode, because so many doctors are not comfortable doing that. They just don't want to deal with that idea that their patient's going to die in 6 months. And so it's been a hard journey. But now we've gotten a lot more educated doctors. Medical schools have changed in their education, and we have more and more younger doctors who are willing to step out and say, yes, I'll do it. And the funny thing is that doctors don't realize that we're not condemning the person to die. We're not going to help them die in hospice. We're going to give them care. They probably will die, but if they don't die, they can come off of hospice. And we did have patients who were on our service for 2 years, and they didn't die, so we had to release them. And a lot of people don't know that. I always told patients when I went to see them that, you don't have to agree to die to be in our service. And they were relieved. For us, hospice wasn't about dying. It was about giving enough care to make them comfortable at home or wherever they were. We had patients in a motel. I've had patients in motorhomes, trailers, anywhere that you can imagine. You could be anywhere and you get hospice care. And it's a great thing. I mean, if you call in the morning, get your doctor to agree at 9 o'clock in the morning, by 1 o'clock, you'll have a full hospice team at home. I mean, they'll come in, set you all up. And, of course, you can have hospice in the hospital. You can be on hospice and be in a care home. You can be anywhere. But they come in right away, and they give wonderful service. It's a 24-hour service. You can call a nurse 24 hours a day, talk to an RN. She can come to you 24 hours a day. In the middle of the night, if you're having a pain episode, they can come and relieve that pain. So, and the best thing is it's free. It's a government function. I always told people that hospice is the only part of the government that really works. And everybody agreed.
What's the P word? What is the P word that I can't think of that's the alternate to hospice?
Palliative care.
Yes.
Well, hospice is palliative care. The reason they came up with palliative care is hospice became too emotionally loaded. Oh, I don't want to go on hospice, but I'll accept palliative care. It's the same thing. Yeah. And so now we have doctors. Would you believe now we have doctors who specialize in palliative care? So things have really changed for the good with that. It's a lot easier to die in America now than it was 50 years ago. Much better. Yeah. Because the end of life can be painful, difficult. Your body systems are shutting down. Dying can be uncomfortable. Now, some people are fortunate with heart problems and their heart just quits and they just die. And other people, certain cancers, like throat cancer, they're so painful to have to struggle through that for several years before you die. But I would go home at the end of a day at hospice. I would know that I had really made the difference in someone's life. And I would also know that I could affirm that life is good. That life is good in spite of all of the problems available and all of the problems we make for ourselves in life, shooting ourselves in the foot. But life is good. I'm glad you were here today. And that's the good news of dying. Why don't we say a prayer? Dear Lord, thank you for helping us through these difficult things and issues and to talk things out. And Lord, be with us in our own lives as we proceed forth from here breathing the fresh air, seeing the sunshine, and rejoicing in life itself. We thank you, Lord, that you've called us to be into the world to make it a better place, that we can share the gospel of Jesus Christ, that we can live out the dictates and the callings of our Lord Jesus. And, oh, Lord, help us now in this coming week to find the peace that we need each day. In Jesus' name, amen.